Just want to state my take on the new protest powers being granted to the police introduced by the Home Secretary. I'm going to be quoting from The Sun. Now, this is not my paper of choice, so just for the record, this is not like my go to paper. But I read all our national papers, and this is what I have in front of me, so it's just for convenience sake, to be quite honest. The reports by Jack Elson. Firm but flare, playing on the words there. Flares and fireworks will be banned at protests, the Home Secretary has said. Thugs will also face jail for refusing to remove menacing face masks in a crackdown on disorderly marches. James Cleverly has drawn up tougher penalties following ugly scenes at pro-Palestinian demos. He said last night recent protests have seen a small minority dedicated to causing damage and intimidating the law-abiding majority. There have been 600 arrests at protests that have taken place since Hamas's barbaric invasion of Israel on October the 7th. Cops are being handed more powers to remove masks after police chiefs warned yobs are wearing them to conceal their identities and avoid convictions. Protesters refuse to take face coverings off when asked will face a month behind bars or £1,000 fine. A similar penalty will also apply to yobs who take pyrotechnics at protests. Mr. Cleverly added taking flares and marches to cause damage and disruption is not protest, it is dangerous. That is why we are giving police the powers to prevent this criminality on our streets. Clambering on war memorials will also carry a 3-month prison sentence, and a loophole allowing zealots to claim the right to protest to block roads is also being closed. The tough measures are being introduced in the Criminal Justice Bill, now going through Parliament. Chief Constable B.J. Harrington of the National Police Chiefs Council said last night, "We are committed to responding quickly and effectively to activists who deliberately disrupt people's lives with reckless and criminal acts." Well, I totally welcome that, but the police need to be seen to be enforcing this. The thing is, legislators can introduce laws, but police are tasked with enforcing them. And I don't think police consistently enforce laws. I think also I've been critical of the inconsistency of policing, for example, when they harass people over non-crimes, yet are slow to respond to actual crimes. Now, what this story gets into the heart of is rights and responsibilities. When this was reported, and I saw a couple of videos about it, the comments section were filled with people talking about a tyrannical government. Well, we're just becoming like Russia. All our rights have been taken away. Well, there's no right to fire flares at the police, and if you are concealing your identity, then you're up to something. I mean, the only purpose someone would have for concealing their identity is if they know they're doing something that could land them in legal trouble. If someone has honest convictions against a particular issue or in favor of a particular issue, then why would they be scared of showing their face in that context? Because they're out to cause trouble and they don't want to be seen because they don't want to be prosecuted. I think that's a no-brainer. This is not. This is not the government's cracking down on the right to protest. Now, I've said before, if there was any indication that the government was introducing legislation to say you cannot protest at all, I would be vocally opposing it. The right to protest is, of course, one of the hallmarks of a democracy. And what do we mean by that? It isn't just vocalizing dissent online. It's, yes, going onto the streets, holding up placards, that sort of thing. But I think it has to be done in a responsible way. The problem with a lot of so-called protesters recently is they seem to think that they alone have a voice and they alone are allowed to disrupt the public. Now, some will say that all protest is disruptive to some extent. But let me cite an example. If there was a group of protesters who took issue with a particular government's human rights record, say China or Iran, and they were to protest outside the embassy of that country, I think that should absolutely be protected, provided they aren't, firing flares or something which would endanger embassy staff and potentially trigger a diplomatic incident. I know last year there were some issues around protests outside the Indian embassy. Um, and of course, the embassies would complain that they don't feel safe. So I think there should be something like I don't know if a perimeter or something, but some way in which people could vocally protest whilst also, not posing any threat to embassy staff. As much as I abhor the Chinese and Iranian governments, it wouldn't be good for, um, international relations to allow a potentially dangerous situation. Although I should say at the consulate incident in Manchester, I think it was 2022, Chinese embassy thugs, Chinese consulate thugs, I should say, were dragging some of those protesters in order to make it look like they were being attacked. Um, on that incident, I think the Foreign Secretary, Len James Cleverly, should have summoned the Chinese ambassador for explanation. Um, I'm not complacent about the issue of freedom. People must have the right to dissent about anything, frankly. Even if useful idiots were to, want to support Putin, I would say they have a right to a voice, with the exception if they worked in the armed forces, in parliament, or in other sensitive areas in which national security would be an issue. But just a run of the mill useful idiot, I say they have a right to an opinion. And they should be called out for it. They should be challenged. They should be ridiculed. They should be, you know, get all the heat they get. But they fundamentally should have a right to voice the opinion, unless, like I say, it's in an area like they work in an area of security, whether it be the armed forces or parliament or elsewhere. Um, but let's be honest about the nature of so called protest. I have a big problem with the press legitimizing criminality by calling them protesters. I've been very vocal about eco groups, the likes of, going in rough order of their creation: Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, and Just Stop Oil. Now, in 2024, they seem to have quietened down a little bit, but I'm going to err on the side of caution. I doubt they've gone away. But so far this year, they seem to have quietened down a bit. Maybe it's just because it's the winter months and they'll pipe up again in summer. I have absolute contempt for them because they're undemocratic, because they have deliberately targeted the public. They haven't targeted big energy companies. I don't think they're legitimate environmentalists. I think they're criminals, and I think they're predominantly middle class entitled brats. But the funny thing about them, or not funny thing, but a notable thing, is they span a lot of age groups. They span from teenagers to pensioners. But I think they're vile individuals. And I would dearly like to see the law toughened against them. I'd like to see their bank accounts frozen. Um, and I'm sick and tired of them being legitimized as protesters. Responsible protesters do not deliberately try and cause misery to the public. That's what they've been doing. I think the charlatans, what have they done? I'd like to ask their apologists to name a single thing they have done to further their cause, and they will say, oh, but they've generated debate. Not really. You know, the debates around climate change were pre existing. Their actions, blocking motorways and so on, the vast majority of comments on it have been angry and have been in opposition to what they are doing. It's not, oh, well, some idiot's gluing themselves to the M1, so let's talk about rising global temperatures. Or, someone has vandalized, recently they targeted the Mona Lisa. So we better talk about, what Shell is up to. This is nonsensical. It's cultural vandalism. I'd compare them to the Red Guards actually in China during the Cultural Revolution. I think they're vile idiots, and I would like to see them held to account. So I welcome anything that does that. There is no right to block the roads deliberately, stopping traffic in that way, stopping people going about their business, stopping people get to work, stopping people visiting loved ones, perhaps in hospital, just doing carrying out important life engagements, maybe going to a wedding, maybe going to a funeral, a baptism, um, a child's graduation. That's the sort of things they're disrupting. Maybe someone has been abroad for some time and they're coming to the airport and their relatives is going to meet them. And then these idiots, make it harder to get there. I mean, the thing that is so contemptible about them is it's deliberate. If you have an accident on a road, that's going to cause disruption, but it is what it is. It's an accident. With these eco zealots, they are deliberately and knowingly trying to hurt the public. And as a strategy, it's brainless. It makes no sense. It really makes no sense. Um, I think they are borderline domestic terrorists. I mean, they haven't planted bombs yet, but certainly that stunt on the Dartford tunnel, the scaffolding on that, the two guys that got on top of the scaffolding, I would say that was basically an act of sabotage. I mean, really, it's a thin line between that and outright terrorism. Uh, so I welcome, laws that are designed to specifically target them. So I think people who are reacting to this say, "Oh, it's a crackdown on freedom." They're ignoring the fact that there is also a right of the majority. One of the biggest flaws with this argument about protests is this notion that those with the biggest voice have the most rights, and those who are on the streets have more rights than others. And being more contemporary, because the eco thing's been going on for 4 years, the protests around the Israel Gaza war, unquestionably, there are anti Semitic elements in those pro Palestinian demos. Unquestionably, there are Hamas sympathizers. They don't belong in this country. Um, and it has to be said, the pro-Israel side are generally more patriotic. They've been flying UK flags. They've generally been a lot better behaved. Um, Now, regardless of what people think of the politics of the situation, and I do not agree with everything Israel's doing, and incidentally, I support people's right to criticize Israel, even to protest against Israel. I do question when Israel is singled out. And, signs comparing this war to the Holocaust, which is knowingly offensive, it's just, I do have a big problem with that. Um, would I arrest someone for having one of those signs? I'm not sure. I would definitely arrest someone for showing any sympathy to Hamas. I think they should definitely be charged under anti terror laws. The police were slow to act on Islamist hate preachers, but very quick to act on, their critics. So the police themselves must be consistent. If Mr. If Mr. Harrington is serious about this, the police need to be acting on this. I think it will have public support. Actually, I really think if you put it to the public, should there be tougher laws against eco activists, for example, deliberately seeking to cause misery, or Hamas sympathizers, I think the majority will say yes, there should be tougher action against them. But if you put it, should protests be cracked down on, then most people would say that's undemocratic. Of course not. So it's very important that people understand what this entails. This is not a ban on protests. And the likes of Greenpeace and frankly some human rights groups are distorting what's actually going on. Um, Recently, a UN commissioner criticised the UK's approach to this, but it's a distortion of what's actually happening. And what about the human rights of the majority who go about their lives? We need to get away from this idea that the minority have rights that trump the rest of us. I will always defend the right to responsible protest, but engaging in criminality that is vandalism, firing flares which could injure the police or other people there in the vicinity, uh, deliberate destruction of property, all that sort of thing. It's counterproductive and it's wrong. And I don't care what the cause is, whether it be farmers in Germany and Britain or whether it be eco zealots, whatever. You know, there has to be responsibility because then we end up in anarchy. I feel angry about a lot of things. I feel angry about our justice system. But if I was to fire flares at a court building, I wouldn't be doing my cause any good. So it's better to speak out, to vocalise, to lobby MPs, hell, stand for election. There's a lot of options that are available. And I'm not saying it's easy, but willful destruction, vandalism, and causing deliberate disruption to the public it's not democracy. So, for all those reasons, I support these new proposals, absolutely, and I want to see the police utilising them.